are such that we will not make any final decisions. They'll have to go on a regular commission agenda, but it is a great avenue for us to take a look at things that we need to move forward as far as official business goes. So we'd like to start off today with an update on state forestry, fire, and state land issues. Jason, you're on the agenda. I'm assuming you're going to do that. You're certainly welcome to sit over here at the table and use the mic if you've got material that you need to spread out. Please do use the mic though so we get it all recorded.
So thank you. I am Jason Johnson, Area Manager with the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. I have a number of handouts, okay?
Yeah.
Casey, you're getting everything that I have. Turned out I didn't have 3 copies of everything. So
Okay.
it sort of decreases. There really is a lot of information here, so I put together a PowerPoint to try to keep myself on track and have all the high points in front of me. What I'd like to do today, so the impetus of all this, of coming to meet with you is that the legislature is considering changes to the wildland fire policy of the state, which governs the way that the state, mainly through the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, interacts with the counties on wildland fire. And so I wanted to give you an update and answer any questions that you have on that so you can understand that as the legislature prepares to debate the bill, which is SB 122. Casey, you have a copy there. That just came out Monday evening. I just read it today. But we've had a lot of information before. So what I'd like to do, I want to start with a quick explanation of how things work right now under the current policy, in a way of setting things up for showing what the new policy would do, how it would change things. I will briefly mention catastrophic fire and how that fits in with this, and then explain what changes would happen under the new policy and how that would work logistically. And then if we have time at the end, just briefly an update on where we are on trying to find a new fire warden for Carbon and Emery counties. So, any questions before I begin? All right. Here we go. Under Utah state law, the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands has primary responsibility for controlling and managing wildland fire. And in fact, we have a duty to take responsibility and suppress those fires, although we have flexibility on exactly how we do that. Utah law also gives responsibilities to the counties, and it's through the person of the sheriff that's designated responsible. And Utah law defines wildland fire as a public nuisance. So it's something that has to be put out. A number of years ago, Rudy, do you remember what year our current policy was enacted? Was that, I think it was 07. The legislature passed a law allowing our current arrangement to take place. So in that second point, it says that the counties may participate in a wildland fire protection system. So that's done through a participating agreement between the division and the counties, and those participating agreements are 5-year agreements. It also says that the state forester will take appropriate action. So whether the counties or the municipalities take action or not, we're obligated to when there's a fire. And then it says that unless the county is in agreement, then all their wildland costs on the unincorporated lands are their responsibility. So that's the law, and of course the law gets implemented through an agreement. So I mentioned the participating agreement, and just jumping ahead, here are a few of the highlights. It required the adoption of a wildland urban interface code that governs building materials and those sorts of things. That's managed through the State Fire Marshal's office. And probably about a year ago, you had a visit from, what was the guy's name? Ted Black, to talk about some revisions to that. Those revisions are part of this new legislation. Also in the current participating agreement, it sets up the relationship with the fire warden. And so under that, the state hires the fire warden, provides him with a truck, and then the counties are responsible for 50% of the salary. In Carbon County, it's 30% of the salary because the warden is shared with Emery County. It's a 30-20 split.
Why is it 30-20?
I wasn't there when it was put in place. I assume it was because of the history of the fire load.
It's based on fire history, fire load for that.
Don't they have more forest in Emery County than in Carbon?
It's based on an unincorporated private lands, not forest.
Okay. Okay.
One of the advantages, or one of the details, is that Forestry, Fire, and State Lands handles all the firefighting billing between BLM, the Forest Service, and the state. So all the billing when the local fire departments or when county equipment is used on one of these wildland fires, all that billing gets handled by the state. And then under the agreement, the county is obligated to pay into a wildland fire suppression fund, and also pay their direct fire suppression costs each year up to a budgeted amount. So there's a budgeted amount that is based on 8 years fire history, throwing out the low and the high years, averaging it out, and that is what the counties are required to budget for. If you spend less than that, fine, that's what you pay. If you spend more than that, that's when that suppression fund kicks in. So it acts as an insurance fund. Just a quick mention of the warden responsibilities, some of what the warden provides under the agreement. Obviously, fire suppression, he acts as the county's official representative and expert on wildland fire. He, I should say, or she, trains local volunteer fire departments, assists them in acquiring equipment and certifications for wildland fire, administers the FEPP program, that's the federal excess property. We get a lot of fire equipment that way, and plans and implements fuels projects and other educational outreaches and things like that to reduce the risk and severity of wildfires. So, you know, where the rubber meets the road as far as dollars are concerned, there's three pieces. There's the 50% of the warden's salary, or in this case 30%. There is the cost of direct wildland fire suppression on the unincorporated lands. And then there is the wildland fire suppression fund, and that is determined, it's just a set dollar amount per acre, and the acres are the taxable unincorporated lands in the county. So that's where we sit right now. It's not as much of a digression as you think. After the 2012 fires, which really hit the counties and really hit the state hard, there was a real desire to try to reduce these catastrophic fires. It affects communities, it affects budgets. We blew right through that suppression fund that year and had to go and ask the legislature for another $9 million, which isn't a lot of fun. So the catastrophic fire initiative was put together to try to reduce that risk, and I'm not going to go into the goals there, but it lists the three goals, and then within that legislation, there's this language that says that it requires the director of the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands to coordinate the development of a statewide wildland fire policy and report to the legislature with their recommendations. So over the last 2 years, the division has been working on this policy and working with the fire chief statewide, the sheriffs, UAC, and the League of Cities and Towns. Both UAC and the League of Cities and Towns have had working groups that have been helping to develop this policy that Senator Vickers will be introducing here soon. So what are the changes? And these are the headline things. There's a new compact, they're going to call it, that replaces the participating agreement. The old participating agreement was only between the state and counties. The new agreement also gives municipalities the option of opting in and strongly encourages them to do so. One of the reasons that a new wildland fire policy has been desired for a long time is we've had a lot of issues statewide with fires that start in incorporated areas, burn into the unincorporated or onto the federal lands, and become very expensive fires, and then no one wants to pay the bill. It gets passed back and forth between the county and the municipality until the lawyers get involved. This policy resolves that issue, and the way it does that is actually the insurance fund goes away and the state simply picks up the cost of the large fires, the extended attack fires. And then the counties are no longer on the hook for that. That happens because of a delegation from the local fire official, so the local fire official can determine, hey, this fire's out of my span of control, out of my abilities, or, you know, I need to get my guys home, and they can formally delegate that fire over to the state. Usually that would be through the county fire warden that would be taking that over, and then they would form a unified command to manage the fire from then on. What the participants, the counties and the municipalities are asked to do in exchange is to take actions to mitigate fire risk in their own areas of responsibility. Now, I put a little question down there, and I'll ask you, do you want me to talk a little more about the logistics of a delegation of authority, or do you want me to head into the financial details and obligations?
I'd say financial.
Okay. That's what the next slide is, so that's good. All right, so here's the table that you saw before with the three places where the county is financially involved in wildland fire currently, and then the second row is the changes. So the whole warden relationship doesn't change. You know, when the working group was meeting with or the UAC working group was meeting, it was made clear that the counties really like that relationship with the county fire warden. They like having a say in what he does and having you know, their money in there to have that influence. Instead of paying for your actual cost of suppression on the unincorporated lands, we'll still have a formula to average out those fire costs. We'll still track them. It'll go to an 8-year instead of a 10-year. And rather than sending a check to Salt Lake, you will have an obligation to take actions to reduce wildfire risk. And I'll get into that a little more in just a minute. Instead of paying into the Wildland Fire Suppression Fund, we'll still have a formula based on acres, but rather than just looking at the number of unincorporated acres, it will look at acres that are deemed at high and medium risk for significant wildfire, and your assessment would only be based on those acres, not on the low risk acres. Okay?
Does the formula still throw out the high and low year, or are you just going to straight 10-year average?
Yeah, that's a good question. It still throws out the high and low year, the way it's conceived right now. and then on the what was the suppression fund side, it's basically exactly the same. It's just acres times a multiplier, $1 per acre multiplier.
Instead of paying those into the state's fund, those will now be just, we have to use that amount for fuel reduction or whatever we want to do on a county level.
Exactly. Yeah, and I've got a slide that gets a little more into the details on that. I can jump to that if we want. This is just a map that shows currently what our model shows for Carbon County as far as acres. So the medium risk acres total approximately 126,000. The multiplier there is 30 cents an acre. The high risk acres total approximately 41,000, and the multiplier there is 40 cents an acre, a little bit higher. And so that totals up to 54,364. This table is a little hard to read. It pulls those numbers in, and then it pulls in the historic fire cost and shows those. The upshot is that the numbers that come out of this new formula, at least for Carbon County, come out pretty close to exactly the same as what your obligation has already been. And so your responsibility under the new agreement would be almost exactly the same, with the difference that instead of sending a check to Salt Lake, you're taking actions in your own county and spending those dollars in your own county. And some of those actions would not necessitate a cash outlay. They could be taken care of by in-kind. So my expectation is that your actual dollar outlay year to year would be lower most, if not all years. This sheet, and you have a copy of this, outlines some possible actions that local governments could take. And I'm not going to try to read them all, but fuels work, using county equipment on fuels work, education and prevention, all those sorts of things would be eligible as long as they are not, you can't do things, you can't count things that you would already be mandated to do. You couldn't count things that that are mandated and funded by federal funds separate. And a lot of the details will have to be worked out. If this is approved by the legislature, then we would go into rulemaking to finish up those details. Obviously, there'd have to be some sort of reporting requirement where the counties would have to show what they have done and that they were eligible actions. Any questions on that? All right. Let me see what else I have. I think we're...
Jason, I have a question.
Yeah.
In regards to the transition to the new plan,
Yeah.
under what scenarios would this become more costly for us? You're speculating that it'll be less expensive, and I'm just wanting to know under which scenarios, just so that we're all on the same page, we understand what scenarios would make it more expensive for us.
I have a hard time seeing how it ever would be for Carbon County. I guess, well, you have a hard time seeing how it would be. So you can have a scenario where you have multiple years with high fire. Right now you have one extremely high fire on your list, but it gets dropped out because of the formula. If you had two very expensive fires, only one of them would be dropped out. But that's not a change from the old system. The old system had the same thing. So, yeah, your dollar outlay would go up, but it would go up under the old system as well. You know, the other factor is those acres of land at high and medium risk. The whole point of the policy is to get everyone's interest aligned in reducing those. So there's a way that the county can reduce their obligation over time. I have a hard time seeing how that would get budged much on the high end. And the nice thing is it's only based on those unincorporated acres. So those Forest Service acres or BLM acres that you have very little influence over how they're managed, those aren't part of the formula. It's just those unincorporated acres where, you know, as commissioners and as the county, you do have some influence through the work that we do and through any possible actions that the county would take. Rudy, can you think of a way?
Yeah, I can't think of a way it would be increase that. If anything, it would decrease based on the fields work you would do in the future.
There are some counties that are seeing their obligation go up under this, but Carbon's not one of them. And that was based on their past fire load and some of these counties that have a larger percentage of unincorporated land. So in this case, having a lot of public land actually benefits you. Under the old system, essentially some of those counties were getting a deal through the insurance fund, and that goes away a little bit with this one. In the case of Carbon County, you come out essentially even. The yellow box at the bottom shows the ratio, and it shows it at 1.
Now, Jason, we have a new emergency services fellow here, Justin Needles. You're pretty new at the job, but do you have any questions for Jason in regards to this? Go ahead and come up to the mic.
Since he was the county fire warden.
Since you were the county fire warden.
Since I am coming as the county fire warden, I've sat through several different meetings about this, and I've asked a lot of my questions. I was sitting there trying to remember what questions I asked. To ask again for you, for your benefit, and I can't think of them off the top of my head. But for my all intents and purposes, I think it's a good deal for the county, for at least Carbon County. I do see benefits of it in other aspects, and I think that can go along with some of the other programs that we are looking at doing. Talking about the prevention and preparedness. So if you look at that blue and red sheet, some of the things that we might be able to do and count towards that, buying equipment and stuff that we're going to probably be doing anyway, we can count towards our participation match. So that $97,000 that we're going to be putting in is part of that money we're already spending as it is. So
As part of that match, if we use CIB money or anything else to purchase that equipment, does it still go towards that match?
I can't remember. I know some of it can and some of it can't, and where those breakdowns are exactly. But another option too is, so the Division of Forestry, Fire and State Lands can put in for grants and do fuels work, which is what they're wanting us to do. There's nothing saying within those that we couldn't go after those grants ourselves, funded through some other places, and use those to meet our match as well. So there's other options out there too to help pay for that and be a cost savings for the county.
When we talk about fuel management, are we talking about controlled burns? Are we talking about harvesting? What are we talking about?
I think all of those are included, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I actually think that's one of the exciting things here. So as I look at this and start thinking about possibilities, there are so many things that could be done. You know, and the county could take a lot of actions on its own, or the county could partner with someone like the division, and there's a lot of ways that could leverage assets. You know, for instance, we're actually quite a small division. When we're doing fuels work ourselves, and a lot of it's contract, when we do it ourselves, we have a bunch of guys with strong backs with chainsaws, and we have a chipper. Now, there's a lot of projects where a few hours with a piece of county equipment would add up to a lot of dollars of match and would leverage, what we're doing already a lot. And so you could envision projects that are planned jointly, and for instance, a road makes a good fuel break, and it's an even better fuel break if you brush it out. And that's a lot easier done with a piece of equipment that the county has than a couple of our guys with chainsaws. If the county gets a mulching head for a traco, they can knock out a lot of work. And so that's just one example. I think that there's just a ton of possibilities, and as all these counties start doing this, we'll probably start hearing about a lot of good ideas that are going on.
One of the concerns I have with the controlled burns is this issue we're having with the EPA and regional haze. And so I know that the state plan is really what we're pushing for to be implemented, but I think that we have to be greatly concerned for our industries here, because so much of that inversion, so much of that haze does come off our wildfires, whether it's state or federal grounds. But the EPA refuses to take into account that really is the issue, and other metropolitan haze that drifts into us. So, I don't know how we address that in this kind of a plan, but before we start burning a lot of stuff, we've got an issue with industry that keeps this community alive, this one and Emery County.
Yeah, and I guess the best I can say is offer my agreement. That's one of the difficulties with a federal agency making a one-size-fits-all rule. You've got realities on the ground, and one of those is wildfire. One of them is, if we're really to address the fuels issue across all ownerships, I think that prescribed fire is going to have to be one of the tools. But actually making that happen is really difficult. And one of the reasons it's really difficult is because of Clean Air Act rules. There's not only the issue of the regional haze, but to actually light that match, we have to have what's called a clearing index, which is based on atmospheric stability. And the EPA sets that threshold quite low, and it makes it very difficult even for us to burn the piles from our fuels project, to say nothing about large-scale landscape level treatment. So yeah, that's a big issue. I grew up back east in Vermont, and I laugh when my friends say, well, why don't you just do a bunch of prescribed burns? I'm like, well, it's not that easy. It might look easy from back here, but it's not that easy.
Thank you.
I have one question.
Yeah.
On the fund, which now we're required to pay that amount, does it have to be paid every year, or will it work in the bill similar to like Class B and C road monies, where we have a restricted balance that we're required to, where we could bank that for 1 or 2 years, and then in year 3 do a large project and get better economies of scale? Or does it have to be paid, $40,000 every year? Or can we bank it and do, a $160,000 project in year 4?
I've only read through the proposed legislation once, and I don't know the answer to that. That might come in the rulemaking. My recollection is it sees it as an annual thing. So my guess is probably the banking wouldn't be allowed, but I could be wrong. I can check out. But the thing I'd want to emphasize is, again, you're not paying into a fund. You're simply showing at the end of the year an accounting of what you spent within your own county, rather than the current situation where you are sending a check at the beginning every year to the suppression or to the insurance fund, and a check at the end of the fire season to pay for your actual expenses in the previous year.
So maybe in that case it'd have to be a phased project, if that is really the requirement, where you're $40,000, maybe it's a $160,000 project, but it's over 3 years.
I see what you're saying. You put all the planning into a big project, and it sort of hurts you if all the expenditures fall into 1 year. Okay. I can see that.
So my other question, sorry, Justin, My other question is, how is this all going to be accounted for? Are you guys going to have an audit that's done on the county every year, or how is that going to apply to us?
That's another I don't know. The bill says that if this passes, the division will come up with a mechanism to certify something, but I assume there'd be some sort of, I don't know, you know, currently we do an audit every year. I come and sit down with, sorry, I forgot your name, with your auditor, your clerk, and we certify that you've met your obligation. I assume there'd be something similar, but maybe as simple as just sending a form in to show what you've done. But the legislation doesn't spell that out. That'll be part of rulemaking.
Any other questions, Justin?
I think I'm good right now.
Okay. All right, thank you. Is there anything else you need to add to conclude?
Yeah, let me just add one quick thing. There were some other details that have slipped my mind on this, but I think I covered the highlights. I just want to mention, so we do have a vacancy in our county fire warden position, and our congratulations are to Justin on his new position. That position is being advertised right now. It closes on the 7th, and we'll take a look at the candidates and see who we want to interview, and then we will talk with you guys about, we'd like to have a designee from the county to be on the interview panel when we actually interview for that new warden. And I'll just say I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to fill that and be happy with the person that we get. You know, it's a big loss losing Justin and his years of experience and his local knowledge, but I'm confident that we'll be able to fill this one well. Grand County, where none of our guys can afford to live, is a different matter. We've got vacancy there.
Tell them to drill some more wells. They'll be able to afford them.
That's right.
So, all right. Any other questions?
Thank you.
I think,
Thank you.
Commissioner, if it would be okay, just a quick bit of information for those, and maybe you can just give a brief highlight on the catastrophic fire and what the proposed project for the county would be.
Yeah, and that touches on one of the things that I knew had slipped my mind. I couldn't remember what it was. So going back to catastrophic fire, the neat thing for me about the new wildland fire policy and catastrophic, and then the CAP fire initiative, is it gets everyone's interest aligned. So it gets everyone thinking about what can we do to reduce the risk of these major fires. And it's the major ones that are the expensive one. So we have a regional work group. It's been meeting over the last couple of years. And it involves the counties, it involves Forest Service, BLM, wildlife, you know, a bunch of entities. And we've identified a number of priority areas, and then we winnowed those down to a very short list that we're actually going to be focusing on all of our efforts between the agencies to try to see what we can all do to reduce that risk. One of those is one that we call Beaver/Lower Fish Creek. And along with that, we have submitted a proposal under the CAP Fire initiative to have the state fund a project in the Lower Fish Creek watershed on the Division of Wildlife Resources property that would involve creating a series of fuel breaks from the bottom of the canyon up to the top. It would involve the use of some logging equipment, some hand cutting, some piling and burning. And at this point, it's in the legislature's hand. So we'll see if they once again allocate money for CAP Fire. If not, and I think that they will, but if not, we will look for other avenues to fund that project. But that's where that is. That is our we only submitted one this year from our 4 counties, and that was it. Is that Lower Fish Creek proposal?
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay. Our next, do you need the lights down, projection, Ben, or? Okay, let's go ahead and turn the lights back up. The next item is the implementation of Monument Preservation Fund to help fund section and quarter section corners for preservation. Ben, if you would, please. You bet. Thanks again.
To introduce this, let me go back a few years. I'm sure most of you are aware of how the public land survey system was started in the United States and in Utah. We call the public land survey system, sometimes given the acronym of PLSS. It's a very commonly used term, very commonly used acronym. The Public Land Survey was started in the East, of course, in the 13 colonies, and we had some very notable surveyors, including George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and I think even Abraham Lincoln worked on a survey crew. But anyway, it all carried into the West, and the West was divided up into the Public Land Survey system consisting of 6 square mile townships. So there's 36 square mile sections roughly in a township. And each section has 8 section corners it question where all of the properties are that are tied to that. So with that kind of a general background, the county, by state law, the county surveyor and the elected official is the elected surveyor, and you guys just hire me to do the work, but it is the county's responsibility to maintain that public land survey system, including those corners. Well, you might ask, who in the state does that? Of course, the bigger counties like Salt Lake, Utah, Weber, Davis, all of those, they can afford to have large staffs of surveyors, and they do it on a regular basis, and they just keep it up. But smaller counties that can't afford to keep that going, like Carbon, are kind of stuck in limbo with no way to do that. So last year in the legislative session, Senate Bill 264, sponsored by Ralph Okerlund, was passed by the legislature to implement and it's called the Survey Monuments Replacement Act, or whatever it's called, whatever legal term is. And they the legislature appropriated $100,000. The original bill was for $1 million, which would have really done something. But as the legislature does, they whacked it down to $100,000, which is very little money, really. Because if you divide that up into the counties in the state, there's 29 counties, and if you take out the big ones that have the money to do it on their own, you're looking at maybe 20, let's just say 20 counties. 20 into 100,000 is not much money. But it was a good start. And in that bill, there were provisions for counties to implement their own monument replacement fund. Now, the reason for that is everybody wants to have the local folks have some ownership, obviously. And the Monument Preservation Fund that would be implemented by the county would be there in a dedicated fund that couldn't be used in the general fund or whatever, but it could go towards documenting and replacing section corners and quarter corners that are lost, or going out and finding the original monuments and getting a good GPS location on them and putting that into the county records and also the state and the BLM records. About 15 years ago or so, BLM was funding the counties in doing some of this work. Initially, I think Carbon County got $60,000 the first few years to go out and document section corners, quarter corners. And gradually that money diminished down to where the last couple of years there's been nothing available from the BLM to help the county. So in the bill, if the county implements a monument preservation fund on its own, then that shows good faith by the local government to kind of match with money that would be available from the legislature. And the BLM has indicated that if the state passes this bill and they start putting money into it, and the counties put some in to show good faith, then the BLM will kick in some significant dollars again, which would be huge. So the effort that I'm presenting to you is to implement a Carbon County Monument Preservation Fund, fund that in some way, and have that money available so that we can apply for grants from the state committee. There's a committee that will oversee this, and the committee is comprised of, it's in the bill, but there's membership from county government, or the county association, and the AGRC, which is the Automated Geographic Reference System that maintain the mapping for the state. And anyway, they will administer that money. So you would apply for a grant from that committee to either use internally in-house to do some of this work, or to hire an outside private surveyor to come in and do the documentation or monument replacement. Of course, the county would manage that, and they've got very stringent requirements in the bill that would make sure that the work was done properly. So I prepared a little map here. I don't know if you want to see it, but just to give you an idea how many section corners there are in the county, there are in the neighborhood of 9,000 section and quarter section corners. And if you discount all of the ones that are out in the boonies that nobody really cares about, out on BLM ground and out in forest ground, where they don't really matter because there's no private land ownership, so who cares if one is gone. But if you look at the incorporated valley area here, Wellington, look at East Carbon, go up through Helper, and then up in Schofield area. If you look at the numbers of those monuments, you're looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. The work that's been done in the past to find and document those has documented a great deal of them in the incorporated and the populated areas. But there are a number of them that have been lost, destroyed. They're no longer there. And the effort would be to prioritize the work on those, because that's where the really important ones are, is ones in the populated area that are tied to private property. And that would be my suggestion, is to take a look at those, prioritize on those the first year or 2 or 3, however long it takes, and then start documenting all of the other section corners in the valley and spread it from there outward. So the amount of money that we're talking is entirely up to the commission, of course. One suggestion would be to increase the fee for filing of records of survey. And I'm guessing, I didn't look at how many of those there are every year, but I'm guessing maybe 3 dozen, Lori, I don't know. So say if you increase that fee by $5, you're only going to have an income of several $100s. The other thing you could do is maybe increase the filing fee, the recording fee, which would bring in some more substantial money. But I wouldn't suggest raising that a lot, because you're going to hear a lot of people start to scream. But at least you're implementing a fund that would be there, that would show good faith to the committee that is going to administer this money. And they have not said that you will absolutely have to have a monument replacement fund in place to be eligible for those grants. However, you can imagine that if you have 15 applications and you've got $100,000, if you evaluate those, you're going to ask yourself, well, why should I give this county money when they don't even care? They're not even contributing. So I think it just is wise to do it, but it's up to you.
In regards to the recording fee, Lori, isn't that like $10 to record? So if we raised it to like $12, then the extra $2 is what would go into this fund. Is that what you're proposing? One of the options that you proposed?
Yes, increase the recordation fee and the record of survey recording fee, and that amount can be whatever you're comfortable with. Lori would have a better feel for how much money that could be, but I think it could be more significant number, obviously, if you were to increase the recording fee for deeds and legal documents.
Ben, are you aware of other counties doing something similar to this?
Yes. I don't have a number right now, but the last I heard, as of about a month ago, there were around 10 counties that have a fund now, and more are looking at doing it. Most other states in the West already have done it. California, Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado. We're one of the last states to really not be in on this type of a program. See, originally the BLM was in charge of maintaining those monuments, those section corners and quarter corners. But with the drying up of federal funds, they don't do anything except on their land, on BLM, and Forest Service has surveyors and they do a little bit, but they've cut their staffs to bare bones and they do very little of it. And on private property, they don't do any. So most of the valley here, they wouldn't do anything to preserve the section corners. So.
How much, and I know it's going to depend on where it's at in its condition, but on average, what would it take to preserve, restore one of these monuments?
It varies a great deal. You have to go through a process that is outlined in the they call it the handbook. It's the BLM manual on public land survey, and it goes through an extensive process where you have to research to try to determine where that section corner was, and you look at all the evidence. You go to the original survey notes, you try to trace it through, you look for marked trees, because in many cases when they put a section corner in, they would put in reference marks on trees, onto another rock or some kind of a land feature. So you have to go through an extensive process of reviewing all of that. Talk to old residents in the area and ask them, was there ever a brass cap somewhere in this area? And if it was, can you show me where it was? So you have to go through all of that, and you determine whether it, and there's three terms. One is obliterated, which would mean there's a little bit of evidence left, and the most severe would be totally lost with no evidence left. And in that case, you proportion it in based on the original survey information. So you have to go to the next section corner or quarter corner away from it in both directions. And then you have to come back in on it, and you use the recorded distance and bearing that are on the original survey plats, and you proportion it in based on those numbers and reestablish it at that location. So it can be anywhere from a few hours work to a few weeks work. It's extremely difficult to come up with an average number on one, because you just can't. It could, like I said, it could be a few $100s, or it could be $10,000, $15,000, $20,000.
Yeah.
Just depends.
The other question I had is, there's been a grant that was being advertised. Is this that same money bill
that's
that
it.
we've been talking about? Because that
That's
was
it.
extended till February
16th.
16th.
Mhm.
So if we were going to take advantage of that, we'd need to establish a fund prior to that expiration date and have the grant in.
They're
grant
not
application.
saying you absolutely have to have the
Right.
fund in place to be eligible, but based on conversations with the UAC, the other counties surveyors in the state, I meet with them at least 2 or 3 times a year. Based on conversations with them, I think you'd be docked some points in the application process if you didn't have one.
That'd be the purpose of having the work meeting and everything, is to inform us in a timely manner so that if we wanted to be more prepared for that application process, we could make a move that direction. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Problem is our next commission meeting is scheduled for the 17th. We'd have to do something as far as a special commission meeting, get the application going if we were going to move in any kind of a direction and establish a fund.
Well, the amount of money this year is so limited. I couldn't get real excited about going through the effort of a couple of weeks' work to put together an application. But next year, if the new bill, and there is a revision to the bill already in the works at the legislature to ask for additional funds, and then if BLM kicks in more money, it's not going to be right away, so it would be in subsequent years. But I'd be looking at the future to get some significant money. We did a project about 2 or 3 years ago, and the county funded it. I think $10,000 was spent towards this same type of thing, and we hired a local surveyor that went out and documented some corners, and he didn't replace any. All he did was went out and found some that we wanted to know if they were there, documented them, went through the process getting all of the paperwork done, and if I'm not mistaken, I think he did six corners for $10,000. But that wasn't physically replacing any. That was just documenting and putting in some reference marks and that kind of thing. So money doesn't go very far when you're talking about this kind of work. But something that we need to do. We're losing section corners, quarter corners all the time.
As far as future growth and expansion, without this information, we could, in the future years, run into some real hurdles. Is that correct?
Well, if we do nothing, we continue on the way we are and continue to have problems with legal descriptions and property ownership. And believe me, we're having some significant issues around the valley with that. Every section corner we lose valuable information, and it puts at risk people's property.
Good information. Anything else you'd like to add, Ben?
No, I think that covers it. Be glad to show you any of the numbers, where I would suggest starting if you want to do that at some point.
It would be interesting to take a look at that for a minute. I'm not making a motion in any way, but Commissioner, where you're the surveyor, maybe you and Lori could work together, maybe get it on an agenda real quick here, and we could look at establishing a fund or making a way through fees and funds to get something in place so we can take advantage of hopefully an increase in monies next year.
Yeah, however the legal process works, so that it is dedicated
I
fund.
think it's
and-
more a budget process, so I think Seth's the one to answer that. I think we can, whether or not we can carve out a special fund now or just get ready for it for next year. I don't know that there's a legal burden to doing that. I think it's just following the correct budgetary process.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll be glad to work with whoever.
Yeah, I think it would be prudent to work in that direction where we have a little time before next year to get some funds put aside potentially. You know, and plan on meeting with Lori to discuss that with her. If Lori's okay with that.
Do you have anything you'd like to add in the work meeting today, Lori? Okay. Let's take a look at your map, Ben. That'd be interesting. And
Okay.
Yep. I'm just glad you don't have to go meet this study on it.
Well, this is just the Wellington Rice help area. It doesn't include anything outside of that. Just to give you an indication, the yellow dots are section corners, quarter corners,
take a 10-minute recess and let Javation get set up for your presentation, and we'll do that next.
I like recess.